What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Uncaged podcast. If you don't know, now you know. This entire channel is all about the journey to the top 1%. And how do we get there? It's by becoming 1% better daily. And interesting topic today when it just comes down to like, how bad do you really want things? Coming off of, conversation that we had on an expert call about relationships, last night in the middle of a 30-day challenge. If you haven't gone through the Uncaged 30-day challenge, I highly recommend you do so. It should be a priority in your life. And also, like, after, post Uncaged retreat in Scottsdale, there's a lot of these common denominators when it just comes down to, like, how bad do you really want certain things? It's funny, the 30-day challenge, there's a lot of homework. There's a lot of, things to go and apply to your life. There's a lot of growth. There's a lot of tracking things. And, throughout that process, it's easy to kind of point fun and make jokes about tracking simple things that seem so, and even documenting things, right? Like, so many of us want to believe in ourselves so much that we believe that we think that the information in our head is set in stone, when it's very much so what we're finding out is not. And so it gets pretty intricate when you go through like the 30-day challenge, and it's documenting things that you've never written down before. It's like you might know it as truth in your head, but until it gets documented and gets recorded, that's when it becomes real. And so throughout this process, again, expert calls that we literally just had, the 30-day challenge, the retreats that we have, it comes down to like real tangible and actionable tasks for you to go and apply. And you can't have that conversation without determining like if you want something bad enough, because in the 30-day challenge, like, we go through all these statistics on the psychology and the science on why we do certain things, and why out of the common denominators of the people that have become successful at this stuff, that the results are fundamentally built into documentation, and not only that, just taking action. And so it's been really crazy for me to think about simple things when it comes to like, how bad do you really want it, or getting to the root of a problem. And then, like, not only that, actually being able to come up with a solution to it. Because I believe that all of us here, if you're on this channel, like, you're striving through personal and professional development. Like, you're looking for solutions to problems, right? And sometimes we have to ask ourselves, like, is that really the truth? Like, do we really actually care about it that much? And so, again, the VIP guys are going to kill me if I ask anyone to track anything else, right? We've been, the 30-day challenge is full of track this, track that, track over here, track there. And, but again, if you really wanted to change something bad enough, would you not be willing to go through a little bit of homework, if you will, in order to solve the problem? And so anyways, I want to put things into perspective, because it's funny, as men, like, we can do so much. And the joke with actually my wife, Heather, on one of the relationship calls, and she read a submission from her women's only group pertaining to like, what do women wish that they could say to their husbands, or what does these women inside of Unleashed want out of the husbands that are in Uncaged, or whatever the case is. And one of the submissions, this lady really went into full detail. Don't know who it is. It's a completely anonymous submission, and that's protected information by Heather. But, she read word for word this submission, because this lady was like, man, like, these men can go out there and build motors and cars, but can't figure out how to, separate darks from lights when it comes to washing clothes. Or, these guys can build multi-million-dollar a year businesses and then walk into the house and see me in the middle of a shitstorm and have to be like, hey, what do you need help with, right? Which, again, on the expert call brought up like really great communication points, because we discussed this at the retreat, the couples retreat, is I believe, and we roundtabled this, and it was just an incredible conversation, and it proved that it was right. Like assumptions and miscommunication on like terminology can really throw a huge curveball in relationships, where like you as a wife or a spouse might be using a term one way because that's how you have indoctrinated it, and like your spouse is translating it a completely different way. So y'all are looking at the same thing, but on two different, mindsets. And now we're assuming that because we had this conversation without going into further detail of like, why, like why this, why that, and like really getting to the root of the problem so that we can come up with a proper solution for it, it gets lost in translation, and then there's frustration and resentment on both sides of things. Is the same thing with like miscommunication on things like that. And whereas in today's world, the communication, I feel like we take the easiest route there is, the path of least resistance. And that's when conversations like, oh, what do you want to eat tonight for dinner, become such a fight because someone says like, oh, whatever it is that you want. However, that's not really it. The root of it isn't, I'm not necessarily saying I would love to eat whatever it is that you want. What you're really saying, the translation there is, hey, babe, I'm overstimulated. I've been with the kids at home all day. Shit's been crazy. There's a mess everywhere. The animals are going bananas. I just don't want to make any more decisions, right? So it's not, the response isn't like, oh, whatever you want, because that's not it. It's not that I want to eat whatever it is the spouse wants. It's that I don't want to make the decision. Whereas men as simple creatures, if we heard that, we get to move into a different role. But then when it's verbalized like that, then it's like, whatever you want. Well, shit, whatever's easiest on you. Because as a human fucking being, and as a man and as your husband, like, I don't want it to be any harder for you than it has to be. So like, cool, let's just do something easy. Now I'm responding in a sense that like, I truly want to make it easy for you, when what you were looking for, that then does the opposite. It throws it back on your plate because I'm responding to the words you said based on the translation of the terms that you gave me, and I translated it incorrectly. But again, it comes back to lack of communication, because you didn't truly mean that in the beginning. You meant, hey, I don't want to make any more decisions about dinner. Fucking choose. Cool. Now I know what really needs to happen. And so with that said, and I know it seems like I'm getting very distracted here, but I'm going to bring it back full circle when it comes to like, how bad do you really want it? We start to see things like this. Repeat these common problems that are coming up, and these common fights and these common miscommunications and the common misinterpretation of terminology, but yet like it hasn't been big of enough of an issue for us to actually stop ourselves and see what the problem is, so that we can evaluate the situation and so that we can come up with a solution to the problem. I'll give you a prime example. Lottie's been doing really good as of lately, but I don't know if it was like a growth spurt or growing pains or a new emotional reaction to like, starting a new school year, and like they kind of switched up the kids in her class and this and that. And it was crazy because like, it was almost like all hell was breaking loose there for a few weeks. And like, we're in the heat of the moment, right? Heather is talking to me about the situation that we're in. And this, in most typical circumstances, would have been a conversation, right? Like I would have been involved in this like shit storm that was going on, and like trying to parent Lottie as well as trying to support Heather, and then like also like make my own decisions and, evaluate the situation. And I was literally just sitting there. And Heather was like, man, are you okay? Like everything. And I was like, yeah, I'm actually just like sitting here in this moment because this is something that has happened, you know, in a cadence the last couple of weeks with Lottie. And I'm trying to like literally like sit here in lifetime and evaluate what the root of the problem is. So here you are seeing repetitive patterns in your actual fucking life, but yet you haven't wanted to solve them. You haven't wanted it bad enough to sit down and think about like, what is these occurrences? Now, albeit, like I just mentioned, like some of this is going to be just miscommunication, which then, like, if you understand that, the conversations then is how bad do you want to fix the communication in your household? Because we can think creatively enough to say like, hey, I don't think we're seeing eye to eye on this same topic. And, you know, one of the conversations I had on the expert call with Heather is like, we're sitting there in front of, you know, 38 guys on the call, and Heather's like giving her perspective. It's like what being like what wives that she's seeing inside of her group want out of us as men. And part of that, you know, conversation we had was, I trust Heather. And I believe that we see eye to eye on like almost everything. That obviously, yeah, we're human beings. There's going to be some things where like we don't 100% see eye to eye on. However, the thing is when it comes to trusting her and her opinion and her word, when there is a miscommunication or when there is a disagreement, usually like that means that someone is working with more information than the other. Because like, let's just assume that in a perfect world, if we both had the same amount of information, we were both working off the same information, when we were to make a decision, it would be unanimous. So if the decision is not unanimous, or if there is conflict, or if there is miscommunication, or if there is, you know, disagreement, what is causing that? What lack of information, what missing puzzle piece is it that we need to locate and conversate about so that we can all have the full picture? And so when it comes to that, it's understanding the different perspectives. It's understanding different personalities. It's understanding different beliefs or whatever the case is to have a fluid conversation, to be able to see the whole picture. Because it's similar. Use the analogy that there's an analogy about a man that like writes like a W on a whiteboard, and he holds it out while he's speaking on stage. So he's from on stage, he's holding it, and he lays it out for the crowd to see. But because he's over them, they are seeing an M where he sees a W, right? So it's that difference in perspective where everyone is correct, but the difference in perspective changes the answer. So again, like, how bad do you want it? These misinterpretations, these miscommunications that you're having with your spouse, with your child, with your coworker, whatever the case is, like, we've established it's a problem. Now it's time for you to sit down in the shitstorm and look back at these like common denominators that are happening within your life and say like, do I want to fix this bad enough? Like, this is obviously something that's going on that is creating some friction in the way my life operates. Now I need to know, like, what do we need to do moving forward? I've said this analogy quite a bit, and pardon me if you've heard it on this podcast prior, but there's a story about a man that's walking down the sidewalk, walking into town. He walks by a house, and there's an older gentleman in a rocking chair sitting on his front porch just rocking away, and there's an older dog laying down next to him on the porch, and the dog is whining. The dog's crying. Well, this gentleman continues down the sidewalk. He walks in, handles his business, and he's coming back a few hours later, and he walks back down the sidewalk, again, back by the house with the old gentleman on the rocking chair still on the porch, and that dog is still there, and that dog is still whining and crying. And he stops and he asks the man, like, hey, man, like, what's going on with that dog? Dude's just still rocking away. He looks at the dog. He looks back at him. He goes, he's laying on a nail. So the gentleman on the sidewalk's like, why doesn't he get up? And the gentleman in the rocking chair looks back at the dog, looks back at the gentleman, and says, I guess it just doesn't hurt him bad enough, right? And so, like, there's a lot of these things that are happening in our life, like the argument about what to eat for dinner, it becomes something where we're laying on the nail, but it doesn't hurt bad enough to get off of it, right? And so, like, I'm bad about this when it comes to a lot of things in life. If it's not painful for me right then and there because of just everything I have going on, it's easy for me to move past it. And it doesn't become an issue again until that pain soaks in again, right? And then it's like, all right, cool, there's the friction, now what? And we're being more reactionary. Whereas if you wanted to stop those fights with your spouse bad enough, what do you need to do to fix that? What do you need to do to solve that, right? And for some of us, it could be something so simple as like, hey, babe, from now on, what I need you to tell me, instead of telling me whatever you want, because I'm going to assume that you mean what you say, which is whatever I want. And if I genuinely don't care what I want and I just want something that's easy for the house, that will be my response, and I don't want to start a fight. So if we could start to communicate better and you tell me how you really feel and what you really expect out of this, then we can move forward, right? So like if instead of you telling me, hey, babe, what do you want for dinner tonight? Just whatever you want. Instead of saying that, please tell me, hey, babe, it's been a crazy day. I don't want to make a decision on dinner. What are we eating? Now I know to step into that, whereas maybe the flip side of it, and I'm not telling you how to solve these problems, I'm just empowering you to say that, like, we're fucking strong men. We can build cars, we can build businesses, we can do this, we can be fixers, we can be decisive when it comes time to, and acknowledging the fact that we all go through, like, decision fatigue, both the men in their day-to-day life and the women in their day-to-day life. So, like, when it all comes together at the end and we're all tired of making decisions, fine. That's life. We know that is that common denominator now. So now what is the solution to the problem, right? So again, some of y'all, it might be miscommunication because you might be willing to be decisive enough to say, all right, cool, fuck it, we're doing pizza, or we're doing spaghetti, or we're doing salmon, or we're doing this, or we're doing that, right? Like, you might have the ability now to know that she needs daddy to make a decision. So you step in as daddy and you make the decision. Or we create some fail safes because, again, like, your life is fucking crazy. Her life's fucking crazy. So maybe you just don't want it bad enough where, like, even thinking outside of the box like this just hasn't caused you to stand up off the nail yet. But maybe you come up with like an easy go-to recipe guide or cookbook, or have just these go-to options when, like, man, it's just been one of those fucking days. Fuck, it might be ordering your comfort food, right? Like, it might be ordering out or going on a impromptu date night with the whole family, whatever the case is. So, like, again, like, how bad do you really want it when it comes time to know that there is friction in your life, especially in your fucking family, with your spouse, with your children, whatever the case is? Why are we always so reactionary? And again, I'm staring myself in a mirror right here, but it's like, these things don't hurt us until they hurt us. But when they hurt us, they hurt us. Whereas now, what can we do to look back on other things that have come up over and over and over again, and how do we, in a proactive approach, on a completely different mindset, instead of being reactionary and being desperate to solve the problem, now we get to think more analytical. Now we get to think more technical. Now we get to think more creative, right? Now we get to look at this at a 30,000 foot view instead of being stuck in the trenches on a reactionary basis and say, hey, I think this would be really good. I'm not saying this is 100% going to fix our problem, but I think that this is worth a shot. This is worth trying. This is worth seeing if this works for us, or at least giving us a baseline to figure out how to pivot moving forward from here. Because throughout this process, you're going to be adapting relatively to all these decisions that you make, because not every time is the go-to going to be picking off your list of easy go-to meals? Not all the time is it going to be sitting down in the middle of a shitstorm while your wife and your daughter are fighting or arguing or going back and forth or having a miscommunication, and just sitting there and being quiet and analyzing the entire situation, right? So these fail safes are what we got to start developing for ourselves. Again, going back to the 30-day challenge, like, dude, there's journals in there, there's lists in there, there's documents in there, there's analysis in there, there's matrices in there. There's so much content to start like internally evaluating your own self and your own personal and professional development and learning you, which is fine, because that's what we need to do, is we need to learn ourselves. We spend all this time, all this energy learning different industries, learning different skill sets, learning different. If it comes to like us applying ourselves to doing something that we want to do, like, we're fucking men. We're going to fucking do it. But for some reason, some of us have not clicked on taking that same fucking energy and fixing problems in our real fucking life. We spend all this time creating a situation that we can escape from our life. We can do it to be like, you know, a depression and anxiety release, and to, you know, whether that's going to the gym, whether that's building a fucking motor, whether that's playing a sport. Like, you have this second life that you're creating for yourself to get away from the real reality that you live in, instead of also internalizing and putting that same energy into fixing the reason we have to run away from our life in general. So like, what is it that like you can create this homeostasis in your own life day to day, so that like it doesn't push you to the point where you're like, fuck, dude, like I can't wait to hit the golf course, or I can't wait to go, you know, to the garage, or I can't wait to do this, or whatever the case is. Like, why can we not start to figure out how to cause less and less friction in our normal life, again, so that way, like, the stuff that we're doing on the side just to fulfill our own dreams and desires and our hobbies and stuff like that can be more fulfilling, because it's not us running away from a life that we hate. It's us having added value into the life that we love. So like, what is it right now that you're going through? And again, I could sit here and have analogies for the next hour on personal, you know, whether it be relationship based between you and your wife, you and your children, you and your coworkers, you and your employees, you and your friends, you and your, you know, the Uncaged brothers, whatever. It could be you personally and the way you operate on specific things. I mean, the list is pretty endless, but like, it all comes back down to how bad do you really want it? Like I said, like, sometimes, you know, it's not an issue. The friction's not there until it's there, right? Like, I'm not worried about figuring out what's for dinner until I need to figure out what's for dinner, right? I'm being very reactionary, whereas if there was this proactive approach to say, hey, this is some of the things that comes up in my day-to-day life that gives me like anxiety to think about, right? Maybe this is something that comes up in my day-to-day life where I don't have a system and a process set in place that if this, then that, right? You know, part of the 30-day challenge, when we talk about different days and planning for your day and setting your day up for success, is, you know, a lot of times because it's not even the majority of people, but if someone were to sit down and say, all right, cool, here's my time block calendar, or here's my schedule, or here's my morning or evening routine, or whatever the case is, a lot of times we plan it in this fake persona or this fake scenario of like a perfect day and a perfect life. So that way, like, or not that way, but when something goes awry, it throws a kink in everything and everything gets derailed, instead of us having like a plan A and a plan B. Like, yo, plan A, if my day goes perfectly from the time I wake up to the time I go to bed, here's what a perfect day looks like. But because I understand that statistically I don't see those perfect days, and I'm not saying that it's got to be a majority bad or a majority haywire or chaotic, but like, there are some industries where people are a little bit more reactionary based to the industry that they're in and the vertical that they're in. But like, all right, cool, we have a plan A, but then let's have a plan B, so that when something does go awry, we don't skip a step. We move immediately we pivot immediately into plan B. And now we've got this structure that keeps us in line with our goals, so that we don't stumble across our feet. We don't end up, fucking ourselves over. But it's stuff like that like, if you wanted to solve this problem bad enough, you would have come up with a way to fix it already. It just comes down to, like, you don't care about it bad enough. Like, it's not enough of a pain point. You're not ready to get off the nail yet. And so, with this, like, I don't want to, like, give out homework and stuff on a podcast, but, like, realistically, like, are you even tracking any of this type of stuff? And that could be physically tracking it, like, on a notebook or in a notebook or on a document, whatever the case is, or even just, like, mentally, like, are you even picking up on how some of this stuff has become a reoccurring issue inside of your life? And that should be your sign that's like, hey, let's spend a little bit of time dedicated to this, to figuring out a solution to the problem, so that moving forward, like, this doesn't happen again. And because now what we're doing is we're raising the standard of our life. Like, no one wants to, like, I don't want to fight with my wife about what to eat every fucking night. Now, we don't, but, like, I don't want that life. So if I had that life, why would I not want to raise the standard of my life and say, hey, like, here is a system and a process to solve this problem? And now you start to be more focused on, like, how do we come up solution focused instead of problem focused, right? Like, that law of attraction, that Bader-Madoff phenomenon, right? Like, when you start to focus more and more on solutions, you're going to start seeing more and more solutions. Whereas if you're very reactionary, so that your focal point is on the problem, you're going to see more and more problems. So as we start to go through this, like, what are some things that cause you stress and anxiety in your day-to-day life that you could create a system and a process so that it doesn't do that? And this can come all the way down to fucking minor things. Like, dude, this is crazy for me to even just say out loud, and some people will understand this and comprehend it and can relate it to their own life, and some won't. But, like, it even comes down to the way I drive to the gym in the mornings. Like, the way I drive to the gym, the way we approach it is from the far side on the street. So there is a pull-in in the parking lot that is much, much sooner than a red light that I have to go to. And then it's a 50-50 chance on whether or not I'm catching a green light or a red light, instead of pulling directly into the first available entrance into, the parking lot for the gym. I go to the red light and I'll wait if I need to wait, if the light's red, or I'll continue on driving if the light's green. But my point there is that first initial pull in, the way it's a huge complex. So the way, like, the initial drive is, you got to go down a little bit and then you got to turn right. And then, like, depending on if there's people in that parking lot, it's stressful to me. And I know that sounds like first world problems, like, oh, it's stressful driving to the gym, like, through a parking lot. But it literally, like, it's like, oh God, like, I'm like, God damn it. Like, fuck, like, I got it, this, that, whatever. And, like, just noticing that in myself, because, like, I'm spending so much time trying to focus on me and how can I make my quality of life better, that now it's not even a decision on if I go in there or not. I always go to the red light now. And it is, again, that's so minuscule to think that, like, oh man, like, that can't stress you out that much. Like, it's not about that. It's about these little baby improvements that I can create that I see cause friction. And I'm not wanting to be that dog that just lays there and whines all the time. But because it doesn't hurt me that bad, I'm not willing to fix it. Let's get rid of these things. Let's focus on ourselves. Like, this is permission for you to focus on yourself, because the more you focus on yourself, the better husband you're going to be, the better father you're going to be, the better business owner you're going to be, the better brother, the better son. Like, that's the move here. Not only that, like, just quality of life in general increases when you start to limit the amount of, anxiety and depression that you deal with all the day long, and the amount of regret and the amount of guilt. We talked about it. Last thing I'll say about this is, it was like Sunday morning, sitting in the back patio drinking coffee at one of the retreats with a bunch of the guys, and I told them, like, my new at the time, this was like my New Year's resolution, or like what one of my focuses this year was going to be on, was not feeling guilty about anything, right? And part of that is understanding that there's certain things that give me like an anxious feeling or guilty feeling or whatever the case is. And so how do we come over that? How do we create processes so that I don't continue down that path? Because then, again, the Beta Madoff or the law of attraction, this, that, whatever, you spend all this time in guilt, you're going to be more guilty and you're going to get guiltier about more things and this and that, whatever. Whereas like, I want to focus on a better quality of life for me, selfishly for me. But luckily, when I focus on myself selfishly, that gives Heather a better fucking husband. That gives Lottie a better fucking daddy. That gives the Uncaged guys a better fucking brother, right? So like when I start to do this, it starts to make it easier and easier to be a little bit more selfish. How can I make my life easier? How can I focus on me and my mental state more? Because I have started to realize that these things that upset me, that these things, they get me desperate and they get me acting out of character. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to act out of character. So now how do we make this journey through life easier in the sense of like, what is something that upsets me or frustrates me? Like, what are some of those pain points? What are some of those triggers that I know when X happens, Y is the reaction? I want to start eliminating that. So now we start to pay attention to what are the things that are starting to upset you or throw you off your game or get you riled up or give you an anxious feeling or start to let guilt creep in? And how do you create a system and a process to alleviate that? So I hope this helps. If you got something out of this, please share the podcast, hop into the free group, join the free 30-day challenge. Uncaged is a huge untapped resource for you to take your life in the next level. We are on mission to make information like this as accessible to as many people as possible. So get in the free group, start engaging, ask questions about how to join VIP. We'll talk to you soon.